Normally, I think I'm going to wear a t-shirt, but today I was not wearing a t-shirt. I said, Larry probably doesn't even own a t-shirt. Welcome to the Memoir Cafe. I'm Sonia Livingston, and I'll be your guide for super fast author interviews and readings. Today's guest is really special. Larry Palmer is the author of Scholarship Boy, which describes Palmer's journey as a young man in the late 1950s from his home in St. Louis to a prestigious boarding school in New England. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to the cafe.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. You know, one thing I decided early on is not to read author bios, which are, the list of books and publications. But you're a tough one because your bio is not typical of writers. You've had this whole other, I think, many different experiences, but specifically a very successful career as a law professor and a vice provost, vice president at Cornell, right? So I just want to throw that out there because I want anybody watching this to understand that your story, as they will see, is really fascinating, but it's multifaceted.
Well, this is a coming of age memoir at one level that sort of starts in 1958 when I go off to boarding school. I win a scholarship when I'm 14 years old, and I go off to boarding school in New Hampshire at Phillips Exeter Academy. And it ends when I'm a second-year law student at Yale Law School when my dad dies and the family gathers. And the more important thing is that I'm the ninth of 10 children in this family. It's a coming of age story, but it's also a reimagination of my own father. Which I think as an older person in my 70s, when I'm looking back at my 14-year-old self, I'm much more able to see my own failures and foibles in this complex family, but also to I think, capture their important role in shaping who I've become.
Yeah, it's funny. The other thing that I like to do here is just have one question for the writer, and that I have changed my question like 4 times because there's so much that I'm interested in. But I think what I settled on is I see this, if somebody said to me, tell me about Larry's book in one sentence, I think I would say something like, it's about this little Black boy from St. Louis going to this prestigious prep school in New England. And so moving from one world to the next with absolutely no preparation. But then I started to think and I thought, well, that's not true that you didn't have any preparation. So I guess my question is, what did prepare you for this? You did go from one world to another very clearly, and you show us both those worlds beautifully.
Yeah.
But can you talk about how you were prepared, if you feel you were prepared to go from one to the other?
I think I was prepared. And going to boarding school, the real question is, can this kid grow up away from home and at home, sort of like two families? But I'll just talk about educationally. Educationally, I was in this gifted and talented program. When I entered Exeter, I only had half year high school, but I was in second year math. I was prepared academically for, frankly, this male-dominated education with very high expectations. My 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teacher was the same man who was working on his doctorate in education at St. Louis University, who had just come back from a Fulbright in Paris. He was fluent in French. His thesis was on teaching systematic logic to elementary school kids. I mean, and he's the one who found out about Exeter and recommended it to my parents.
Okay.
I think I also was prepared socially. When you get to a school like this, if you're kind of the typical rebellious teenager, you might have a lot of problem taking advice or orders from older males. I had not only my father, I had 2 older brothers, one of whom my brother Willie, intensely interested in my education. The other brother, my brother Al, was more interested, I think I'll say, in just my physical and social development. And so I think I was programmed the way Mr. Rogers would want a person in my position. That is, I was programmed to look for the helper. I did not expect I was going to do this all by myself. I was going to be fighting with the teachers or anything like that. I expected I would find welcoming people, and I found them.
Yeah, that expectation is so interesting to me though, because you talked about how you're prepared academically, which I have I mean, that's very clear socially. I was wondering about emotionally, and you just touched on it when you said you basically expected that people would help you. How did you have, I'm not so sure I would have that expectation right now. If I were suddenly a child and sent there, I would have been much more inclined to be afraid or keep to myself. But something in you, Larry, did expect that on some level you would be welcomed. Can you briefly talk about that?
Well, I think it comes back to how much confidence, emotional confidence I had in my parents. I actually saw my oldest brother cross-examine the principal of the school about race, about how boys are treated, about hazing, about whether or not there'd be other Black kids there. And I had this implicit confidence. My parents would not have put me on that train if they didn't believe I could do this.
It seems like a really good combination of people who were good and welcoming, but also your ability to receive that. Because that's the thing that I think some people struggle with. I know I have struggled with when I feel like I'm crossing from one world to the next, is my own inner ability to receive that. And so you're what I love so much. There's so much in this memoir that I love, but one thing I love is just seeing Larry, the little boy, making this transition and just being open, and I learned so much from that. So I would love it if you would go ahead and read the short excerpt.
Okay, I'm going to read some short excerpts from the book, from two of the three parts. The first part is called Get the Boy on the Train. The Sunday in 1958 when I left St. Louis, I sat in my coach seat in Union Station quite a while, going over my parents' instructions in my mind. I was to change trains in Cleveland that night and take another train to Boston. Once in Boston, early the next morning, I was to take a taxi to North Station, where I would board a third train north to a small New Hampshire town that I, my parents, and my siblings had never seen. As the train pulled slowly out of the station into the darkness of a tunnel, I wasn't conscious of the fact that there had not been any special goodbyes to Al, Willie, or any of my other brothers or sisters. As the engine sped up and we emerged once more into the bright September morning, I could see the bridge over the Mississippi River into Illinois. I tried to imagine the new world I was about to enter, and as the train hung there above the current, tears began to flow down my cheeks. I looked back at the smokestacks of St. Louis factories, reached for my handkerchief, and buried my face in it against the wind so that none of the people around me would notice how the confident smile I'd worn during Mom and Dad's farewell had disappeared. What I think some people, writers, talk about the emotional river. There's the emotional river. People said, well, how can you be in two worlds? Well, I wanted to be in two worlds. I wanted to go to this exciting school that I heard about, and I wanted to be the child loved in my family. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to hold that tension together. And people say, how do you do that? But that is one way of doing it. The second part of the book is called Straddling Two Worlds. And I want to just read a short passage from that, and then I'll do one from the third passage. There's a chapter called Dancing with My Sister. And I'm going to just read briefly from the beginning of this chapter. I always liked slow dancing with Leela to bluesy crooning from the hi-fi, the high fidelity record player in the far corner of our living room. When my impromptu lessons in the fine art of rhythmic motion began, Leela was 17, rouged cheeks, penciled eyebrows, glamorous. I was 9, skinny and nearly bald from a recent haircut. The cliche of a pesty little brother in my striped pullover shirt and brown corduroy pants. As I gazed up at my sister's coffee and cream face, Suddenly aware of the scrawny curve of my arms around her, I recall thinking wistfully how she always looked ready for a party. The wailing lyrics of the song, its swirl of clarinets, piano, and saxophone sounded like something we'd listened to before on the radio. Am I blue? You be too. Leela would retrace her steps until she stood in front of me again, her wide check skirt whispering softly against me as, through an apple red smile, she commanded, let's try that again, but this time you lead. As she closed her eyes and hummed a familiar tune, she could sense my intended direction before my body had a chance to signal where I was going. I didn't feel like I was leading. Rather, we were two fish floating side by side through the wavering tide of music that filled the living room. If your dreams, like your scheme, done fell through.
Those two pieces are just give such, I know they were brief, but they give such a nice flavor for the story, but also I get such a reverence from you for your sister in that particular scene. But just sort of everything, like you talked about going to this exciting world. It's, I guess earlier when I was asking about how are you prepared, some of it is just Larry had this wonderful sense of the world and of other people, and that just comes through. The story is fascinating, but who you are really comes through. And so thank you so much for reading that. And I know that people will pick this book up and want to continue. I wondered if you would give the viewers a writing prompt. One of the things that I like about inviting people to the cafe is that you have such a good experience writing. What's a good writing prompt for people?
Think of where their memories started in their lives, but do it more like an archaeologist rather than a construction worker with a front loader. That is, to go carefully. I think sometimes maybe the linear thinker, I've written other kind of books, might take over and you want to build too quickly, but just concentrating on what was that first memory and just letting it kind of come alive, like and let it blossom into something. And where does it fit into my story?
That's such a great prompt, because what you're saying really is to by excavating, you're trusting, you're respecting that image or memory, and knowing that's going to lead you somewhere versus you sort of bulldozing it into a preconceived, prefabbed idea of where you're going. Yep. And almost always we're delighted when we do that. So that's so great. So Larry, I forgot to ask at the beginning, I wanted to ask you to show us your mug, because it's a cafe and we have coffee mugs. So what do you have? Show us your mug. All right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And maybe show us that's the cover of your book. That's little Larry.
That's little Larry. There's the book cover for you.
Oh, it's beautiful.
And one thing my publisher did, which I don't know if others, but notice in most memoirs, you find all the pictures sort of together on this, and it goes back. What they did is they put the pictures in with the story.
Yeah. No, that's nice. It's a beautiful book, and I highly recommend this book. We are going to leave links below in the information area on where you can order this book, some independent bookstores in the great city of Richmond, and also Larry's website. Larry, thank you so much for visiting the cafe and classing us up just a little bit. Normally, I think I'm going to wear a t-shirt, but today I was not wearing a t-shirt. I said, Larry probably doesn't even own a t-shirt.
Oh, I own hundreds of t-shirts, but
what do you put them on?
I would not remember. I had to wear a coat and tie to school since I was 14.
But really, thank you so much. And thank you for watching and visiting the Memoir Cafe, everyone. I hope that we'll see you again. If you're interested in receiving updates, notifications when new authors are interviewed, please hit subscribe or like, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.